Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and this is a Reduvia Bloodblade build. Now, we're going to dual wield the Reduvias. It's going to be an awesome dagger build, but we're going to focus a lot on Bloodblade because Bloodblade gives you kind of a close to medium projectile. It doesn't have a ton of range, but it has a lot of bleed buildup that you can do from a little bit of a distance, making these incredibly powerful. And to boot, they're incredibly fast, highly damaging, and they scale well with Arcane. Now we're on journey 12, I'll show you that in a second, but max scaling at this point. It did take me a second to get Mog really not to phase. I think it took 2 or 3 tries to get the right RNG there. The scavenger swords are definitely quicker in terms of damage because of the pure raw damage you get in between procs, but the Reduvia comes pretty close, and for a dagger build, it's very powerful. Plus, you get that medium range attack or that short range attack where you can throw out the Bloodblade, do a lot of bleed buildup, and basically obliterate bosses with ease because they're very quick to use too. They come out very fast and they do a lot of bleed. So where do you get the Reduvia? You get the Reduvia at the Aguil Lake. It's kind of like a ravine in the Aguil Lake, and you have to fight the NPC invader there. He's not too difficult. You can actually beat him very early in the game, and I think you get a hunter help too, so it's very, very easy to do. Unfortunately, though, it is only one per playthrough, so if you want to offhand a different dagger, or have a friend or go on a forum to drop you a second Reduvia so you can do this build because it is a lot of fun. So here we're going to be obliterating some bosses, as I always say obliterate, but we're going to destroy some bosses with the Reduvia. I want to talk about a few different things in regard to it though. So as far as dual wielding it, you probably get more bleed and build up and status effects by just going crazy by, I'm on Xbox, spamming LB and just using the dual wield moveset. But for me, I really enjoy Bloodblade, so I focus this build a lot around that because if you want to do bleed build up very quickly, there's always Seppuku that's going to kind of beat it. And like I said earlier, I'll leave it in the description below. The Scavenger's Curve Swords are excellent too. They absolutely shred. So for this, I wanted to focus on the ability to apply bleed from a little bit of a distance and kind of have an overpowered build that was built around Bloodblade rather than dual wielding attacks. And there was a learning curve, much like with me learning the jump attacks on the Scavenger Curve Sword. I had to learn the distance here. A lot of times in the beginning when I was using this, I would actually not be in range because it looks like it goes further than it actually goes. You do have to be fairly close. So it was a little bit of a learning curve, and I did get beaten by a couple different bosses, nothing too crazy. Eventually though, I figured it out and I found a safe place where I can kind of spam it, start to learn how to use Bloodblade, and then regenerate stamina and just make sure that I can continue to basically throw those out, continue to apply pressure, damage, bleed buildup, and honestly do a ton of damage in general. And then if I needed to, I could spam LB or attack like crazy with the daggers because they do attack very quick. They build up bleed very fast. They're a good way to finish off or start an opponent. But in between the battle, at the height of the battle, I found Bloodblade to be very, very useful. It really is super powerful in the sense that it has that distance, it has that range, and that ability to just kind of knock enemies down by just proccing bleed so quickly. Especially the first and second procs seems to do a ton of bleed. I know that Bloodblade itself does more bleed than any one single attack, but then again, like I mentioned earlier, the Reduvias do attack very quickly, so you can probably build up bleed faster that way, but that's the less safe way of doing it. The more logical way for me to do it was to use Bloodblade, and honestly, it's a fantastic and pretty unique Ash of War that for PvE can kind of just obliterate a lot of bosses, do a lot of damage, and as you can tell here, I missed a couple times because daggers have a very short range. But yeah, Bloodblade was definitely the way to go for me, and it was something that I ended up doing this entire build based on. And don't worry, we're going to get into build, stats, equipment, everything that you'll need to know, including a couple harder bosses on here as well. If you're not subbed though, definitely sub to this channel if you love overpowered PvE builds. It's been growing a lot lately. This community's been awesome. So even enemies with a little bit better resistance here, and again, I was at the beginning of the game, like the Magma Worm. The Magma Worm actually has decent bleed resistance. He's not exactly weak to it, but he's not like immune to it or anything like that either. He just has fairly decent resistance, and it still does a lot of damage and a lot of bleed build up to him. This was kind of consistent across the board on many different bosses and fights. Bloodblade really has a lot of bleed build up. From my own reading and testing, my estimate is it probably does around 150 per blood blade. That's just a guess. I can't say for sure on the numbers, but it feels like it's somewhere in that vicinity, which is a lot. That is a lot of bleed buildup per attack, especially since it comes out so fast. You can just spam it, hit it like crazy, build bleed build up, and then with the Shard of Alexander you get some damage on the attack boost as well, which is really helpful. Again, though, fully upgraded, I was getting 94 bleed at 60 arcane. My estimate on Bloodblade was somewhere in the 150 range. I can't confirm that. I have no way of confirming it, but to be honest, it seemed like that. It seems like at least what you're using on the dagger and then another half times. I mean, it could be as much as double with like 80 arcane, I'm not sure, but Bloodblade is definitely, as far as single attacks, going to get you more bleed. It has very fast bleed buildup. If you pay attention to the first procs on Bloodblade, it procs incredibly quickly. Pretty much no matter the boss, 2 to 3 attacks with Bloodblade, and they're going to proc bleed, which is awesome, while doing a good amount of damage in general. And as you can tell with the Margit out here in the Atlas Plateau, he got absolutely destroyed by it. So this was before I got to Mog, but on NPC invaders and such, as you can probably tell earlier when I grabbed the Reduvia, it works really well too. Obviously this has a very good niche in PvP, it's used in PvP because it can apply bleed so fast. Bloodblade really is something that's overpowered, does a lot of damage, proc bleeds very quickly, and even when they're dodging, you can kind of spam it so much that they're eventually going to get hit by it anyway, and then you can just spam the dual wield attack moveset and just absolutely shred them. Time for equipment. For equipment, I have 2 of the Reduvias, obviously using Bloodblade on 1 in the dual wield moveset. We have the White Mask, Green Turtle Talisman to get my stamina back for Bloodblade, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exultation, Shard of Alexander, and the consecutive attack tier. You can use Millicent's Prosthesis too if you're going for the entire consecutive attack thing, but I was mainly using Bloodblade for this. So my stats at 150, since I was really heavily on Bloodblade, which is going to scale mostly with Arcane in that aspect, and the damage is actually a little bit physical too, so I think Arcane first and then Dexterity. I did 60 Arcane, 45 Dexterity, and then wanted a good amount of Vigor as well. By the way, you can also use the Ritual Swords Talisman for Bloodblade too if you're at full HP. That's another good talisman that you can use in that spot. And as far as mob controls goes, this actually works really well against mobs because it builds up bleed so fast, and regular enemies tend to not have much resistance to bleed, so you can just spam it and you're going to get a ton of bleed procs and you can just move through enemies with ease. I didn't have a problem with any regular enemies throughout the game. I just wanted to show this and go over how it works on regular enemies. For regular enemies, it's absolute destruction. Yeah, I can't think of like a regular enemy that I really had a problem with. It works very well. And as far as being able to just spam L1 or use Bloodblade if you're more comfortable with that, obviously I was using that for most of this video and that's kind of how the build is. But as far as regular attacking too, of course it does a lot of bleed, a good amount of damage. I had one at +10 and the other one at +9, so yeah, it absolutely shreds. No issues with mobs here. They get completely taken care of with the Reduvia. Well, Morgoth's tough on New Game +7, I guess, but not really with the Shackle, so we're able to absolutely shred him as usual, and then I switched back to Bloodblade. I was actually surprised I got hit here. I guess his AoE is larger than I thought it was. You don't have a lot of range with the Bloodblade, so be aware of that, but it has just enough range to make a lot of fights very, very safe, and because it's so spammable, and if you concentrate or use stuff like consumables or even the Green Turtle Talisman to get your stamina back, you can just keep using it because it costs so little FP. It's incredibly cheap to use for how much damage and bleed it does. By the way, if you ever want to test a bleed build against something that's not immune but at least a little bit resistant, dragons and magma worms and such are very good to test it on because it'll really tell you how much you're proccing, in the sense that they're kind of like in the medium range. They're not weak to bleed, they're not immune to bleed, they're somewhere in between, and if you're proccing relatively quickly on them, given their high resistance, then guess what? You're doing a lot of damage in general, you're doing a lot of bleed because they have good resistances, and you're able to take down big bosses with the Reduvia Bloodblade, which is pretty awesome. And that's also a heck of a dagger that you can grab early too, so it is a very, very fun thing to use, especially in the early game because you can get it right away. You just need to get that second one, that's the only issue with that, or just use a different dagger in the offhand for the time being. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a pretty epic build. It ended up being better than I thought. A lot of the people, by the way, I'll leave the link for the Discord below in the description, people on the Discord and my community in general was asking me to do a dagger build, so I finally came up and decided to do a dagger build, and it turned out to be a lot of fun. If you love overpowered PvE builds, definitely sub to my channel. There's a ton of awesome builds on there. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you guys there.